Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses, fine public servants. There's a phrase in the Ukrainian language, Holodomor, that was created in the 1930s. It is a combination of two words, one meaning hunger, one meaning plague. In the current Ukrainian dictionary, this is the definition of the phrase: artificial hunger organized on a vast scale by a criminal regime against a country's population. That's from a 2004 dictionary. The phrase comes, as you both know, from the forced famine that was visited upon Ukrainians and others by Stalin in 1932 and 1933. We're in the 90th anniversary of that catastrophe. The English language doesn't have a word for that because we've never lived under that. I think the Irish language may have a word for that because Irish have lived under it, but we haven't lived under it. But there is a word for it, and this Congress has recognized the Holodomor, and many other nations have, as a forced genocide using hunger as an artificial weapon. Vladimir Putin aims to be a great Russian leader. He probably thinks of himself in the Peter the Great category, but the real analogy is Stalin, and in this instance, he's probably surpassing Stalin because the death toll from the hunger that he is forcing on Ukrainians is not just felt within Ukraine. The estimates of the Holodomor in the 1930s is probably conservative estimates, about 3 million Ukrainians and folks in other Russian republics as well died, but the effects of it were not felt so broadly in the globe. And so we've seen this before. We've seen it before, and we have to be vigorous about it. I want to switch gears in a second, but many of my colleagues have kind of focused on the disinformation side of Russia. One of you indicated that while they are engaging in disinformation, you don't think the world is being fooled. But they're saying some things that make me wonder if they're being fooled. Let's see here, let me find this. June 3. The African Union chair and Senegalese President Macky Sall had a meeting with Vladimir Putin and said, quote, "The crisis and sanctions create serious problems for weak economies," seeming to put the problem on the sanctions and the crisis as if it's kind of a, natural phenomenon. I'm glad you're both going to be in Africa. I hope you can get particularly African nations that are suffering the most, or more than many parts of the world. I hope you can get those nations to just speak the truth. It's one thing to speak the truth to power, but how about speaking the truth to evil? It would seem like you would be willing to speak the truth to evil. I understand administrator power when they are dependent on Russia for fertilizer, et cetera, that it's easy for me to ask that. But when leaders in regions of the world who are so suffering because of this deflect blame, I got to believe it's an intentional deflection and not a naive deflection, and I hope you'll challenge them on that. The title of the hearing is Global Food Security Crisis, and we've really focused on the effect of the Ukrainian illegal war on the world. I want to give you a chance just to talk about, in a minute and 40 seconds, what is the U.S. doing to deal with the climate realities of the global food security crisis. One of our Democratic colleagues, Senator Tester, whose family has farmed in Montana for 4 generations, and he's farmed the land for 44 years, told us yesterday in a luncheon that he was normally bringing in about 28,000 bushels in a harvest every year, and last year it was 1,600. And it's likely to be that this year. And so what is the U.S. doing, USAID? You mentioned resilience. What are we doing at the UN to try to deal with the climate emergency component of a long-term global food insecurity challenge?
Well, I can start briefly and just say I had an exchange earlier with Senator Cardin where I stressed the word resilience. And our Feed the Future program for years, even though not branded as a climate program, has been about getting to farmers and trying to get at scale to farmers drought-resistant seeds that have been developed in labs in this country or all around the world that have been funded by USAID since the last walloping food crisis at scale occurred in 2007, 2008, and Feed the Future was created by you all and by President Obama thereafter. So that's part of the answer. It's also just a sad fact that you see embedded in the growing emergency needs and the growing Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs budget, thanks to you all, but it's exponential. And it's not only because of conflict, although it doesn't help that there are 35 conflicts on the continent of Africa, but it is for circumstances like what we're experiencing right now in the Horn of Africa, which is for the first time in history, the fourth straight dry, rainy season. And we are expecting, the meteorologists are expecting a fifth. So the fourth never happened before in history, and they're already looking ahead and expecting low rainfall for the fifth that is approaching. So the PREPARE initiative that President Biden has announced, the more, again, that we can resource, developing countries are angry. One of the reasons that President Saul even, I think, was receptive in some fashion, at least to make the statement that you describe, is, the countries are now clamoring for losses and damages. And we are trying to do adaptation programming that helps them withstand floods, droughts, through emergency assistance, but also to things that allow them to continue to grow their agricultural sectors against the odds.
Much more to talk about in this space, but I'm over time. I'll yield back. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.